Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight we're going to be heading into the attic for a collection of horror stories. I'm sure you'll be sufficiently spooked by the end of it. I'd also like to share tonight's artist in the spotlight, Jacqueline Hyde, who submitted this really spooky picture. If you have any artwork that you'd like to submit, feel free to send it over. Link in the description. If you'd like to see more of Jacqueline's work, you can find her Instagram tag in the description too. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Around 10 years ago, I was living with my mum, dad, and older sister in an oldish house in a very small village. When I say small, I mean its only main feature was a small church and a few scattered houses occupied mostly by very old people. At the time, it was the summer, so I wasn't at school or anything. And since we were so far in the middle of nowhere, I spent most of that time at home, glued to one screen or another. The usual routine was that I'd wake up at around 10 or 11. By this point, Mom, Dad, and sister had all left for work, so I had the house to myself. I'd go downstairs, make toast, watch random stuff on TV for an hour before heading back to my room to continue with whatever game I was grinding through that particular day. The usual habits of a 17-year-old guy cut off from the rest of the world by many, many fields. I should give you a quick rundown of our house. It was an older cottage with 2 rooms upstairs, mine and my sister's, and everything else downstairs. As you walk up the stairs, you got to a very small landing and could go either left to my room or immediate right to my sister's room. Basically, the way this was laid out was that I could sit in my room with the door open, and my sister's room is directly opposite. I should also mention that the ceiling in both our rooms was slanted. We were basically in a large attic where the roof slanted down because of where the slant met the wall, and we had a crawl space that ran the length of the house on either side of the room, both with a small door to access them. These were mostly used for sorting normal attic stuff like Christmas decorations and old forgotten toys. The doors to these were thin little things, about 4 feet tall with a small handle on the outside. This is important because turning these tiny doorknobs opened them, but only from the outside. If the door was pushed shut, with you inside, there was no way back out. I discovered this for myself on more than one occasion. The door on my side ran along my room and along one wall in my sister's room, and hers ran along the other side along mine. This space was not very big. You had to crouch to stand in it, and most of the time you were in there you were crawling on your hands and knees. Anyway, this one morning, I'm awoken to a familiar noise, sort of a small creature rustling around in the crawl space on my sister's side. I could hear this because my bed was against the wall that ran along it. Not an unusual noise. Living in the countryside, we had mice almost constantly, and they pretty much had a run of the storage spaces regardless of how many traps we set. I thought nothing of it and got up and went off to begin my morning ritual of toast and TV. The first odd thing I noticed was while watching TV, I could hear movement upstairs. My sister's room was directly above the living room, so I assumed she'd just not gone to work that day for whatever reason and continued munching. Around an hour or 2 later, I went back upstairs and booted up my PC. As I was waiting, I turned around to open my door and faced my sister's closet, and realized it was late in the day, and she had yet to leave the room. An odd thing since she normally parked up on the sofa in the living room on her days off and didn't move until our parents returned. We're not the most active family. I started to think that perhaps she was at work, and I'd imagined the noise from upstairs. But as I mused this, I noticed the crack of light at the bottom of her door as a shadow passed by it. Okay, so there's definitely someone in there. Must be her, right? I once again pushed it from my mind and went back to my PC. More time passed, and the thought came back to me. Why would she be at home but not leave? She only has a small TV in her room and no books. So what had she been doing in there all day? I glanced back around and saw the shadow under the door. She was still moving around. So what was up? I finally decided to knock on the door. I tried a few times and even said her name but received no answer. Weird, but maybe she had headphones or something on. I knocked a bit harder again and said her name, but no answer again. Alright, I thought, forget this. I'm just gonna go in. So I cracked the door open and peered round. I found an empty room. No one inside at all. Feeling slightly confused, but better that it was just in my imagination, I stepped in properly and looked around and saw something that made me full-on panic. Near the bottom of her little door leading into the crawl space, there was a small hole that the mice had made to get in and out of the bottom. Really small, but just big enough to fit half your hand through. There, coming through that hole, were 4 fingers, holding the door shut from the inside. At first I thought, no, it can't be fingers, don't be stupid, until I watched them slowly creep back through the hole into the crawl space. I lost my crap. Very quietly, might I add. I backed out of the room, shutting the door behind me, and ran to mine. Being the stupid teenager I was, I grabbed what might be the most imposing weapon I could find, the fake Winchester rifle cap gun I got from Disneyland a few years previous. I figured that if whoever was hiding in that bedroom didn't believe it was a real firearm, I could at least hit them with it. I ran off downstairs to where my dogs were on the far side of the house and called my mum, who worked a 5-minute drive away from our house. She told me to stay put, and that her managers were on their way. In this time, I made a small upgrade from fake plastic rifle to one of my dad's golf clubs and felt much better with that. Finally, my mum and her boss, Johnny, show up, and I tell them everything, leading up to this point. They say okay, and we all set off upstairs to investigate. Me, rather unheroically, being up the rear with my golf club. We get to my sister's room, and I point to the door. I'll never know if my mum is just hard as nails or massively stupid, but while John and I watch, she marches over to the door, yanks it open and sticks her head in. A moment passes while she looks left and right, and John and I are preparing to yank her back from the clutches of the psycho hobo murderer hiding in there before she shouts, "Chris, what are you doing in there? Get out!" Small amount of backstory. Chris was my sister's boyfriend. Unbeknownst to me, the night before, my dad had asked Chris to leave, as he had stayed with us for around 5 days at this point. He said, yep, that's cool, and as far as Mum and Dad knew, he headed home. What really happened was instead of leaving, him and my sister had planned to make it seem like he'd left, then he could stay another night. He would then wake up before my mum shouted my sister up for work, like she did every morning, and would hide in the crawl space and sleep there until everyone left for the day. The one small hitch in the plan was that they didn't think of me. They'd forgotten I was home and conveniently sat directly opposite the only exit for most of the day, and as a result he was trapped. When I knocked, he hid himself behind the door and held it shut to prevent being locked in. My mum swiftly told him to get out and not return. Sadly, this was not the last time we saw the guy. As it turned out, he'd stolen quite a bit of money from my sister's room while he'd been hiding out there, because my sister makes terrible decisions. Got her pregnant, and proceeded to smash windows trying to get at her and the baby around a year later. For a while we lived in the same city, when I went to uni and he was spending time at the prison there for stabbing someone in a completely different town. Super guy. Oh, and a small topper to all of this. As I mentioned before, the only rooms upstairs are mine and my sister's bedrooms. He'd been there for close to 14 hours with no access to a toilet. But no worry for this guy, because he had a lot of empty bottles to piss in, which he kindly left behind for us to clean up. And finally, about a year later, as Mum was getting the Christmas decorations out, which were as far back in the storage space as you can go, she found a small bag filled with feces. I should mention, where she found it is exactly next to where my bed is on the other side of the wall. The rustling that woke me up that day was him, hiding his feces amongst our tinsel and trees. So to my sister's baby daddy who hid in our crawl space and used it as a private bathroom. Let's not meet, yeah? There was a small door that led to the attic space in my bedroom, and it became a habit that I would shut the door as I walked into my bedroom a few times a week. I didn't think anything of it, and just assumed my mum didn't close it all the way when she left it. After a while I made the mistake of joking with her when she made a comment about me not picking up after myself, and I said something like, "Every night I have to close the attic door behind you, how about you shut it all the way when you're done?" She then informed me that she hadn't been in the attic for months. I asked my brother and my father. None of them had. So then I started to pay real close attention to it, making sure it was closed in the morning, checking it after school, and checking after dinner, then heading up to bed. And what do you know? It was open. After a few months of wondering, studying, experimenting, I thought I'd see what happened if I just didn't shut the door. I opened the door before school and checked it after school. Still open. Closed it after dinner. Still open. Before bed, still open. Now, I'm laying in bed, mind going crazy with the open door across the room. I decide to check it out, so I roll over and focus on the black space into the attic. That is when I see a face staring back at me. I bolt downstairs, wake my parents up, get ridiculed by my brother and switch bedrooms with my brother and move into a new house about 6 months later due to an expanding household. And what do you know? My new physics teacher and his wife actually bought our house. I could have forgotten all about the events and chalked it up to me having an overactive imagination. But then, I had discovered in my senior year how awesome our physics teacher was, and it became my favorite class by far and favorite teacher. At the end of senior year, my friend and I took our VHS camcorder around, doing mostly silly things, but then took it to my old house to see what they'd done with the place. We got a very fun tour. I got to tell stories about all the projects my dad did that were still a part of the house. Then the wife led us upstairs and showed us the sewing room. So I jokingly ask, "Notice anything strange about this room?" And her face goes blank. On camera she asks what I mean, and I try to shrug it off but end up saying something about the attic door. She confirmed that every time she comes up to sew, it's open, and then tells us that the second day of being in the house, their dog, a German Shepherd, had gone into that room, but would not go back downstairs. He started barking and could not be consoled, then jumped through the window, landing on the tin roof over the porch and running off. The dog did not come back until the next day, and has not stepped foot into the hallway that leads upstairs since. I had the initial thought that I could show my parents and brother the story I had on film, but I decided to just let it be. The attic is the space in the house that runs parallel to the second floor, not above it. I was 11 to 12 when this was going on, so I did not immediately suss it all out. When I told my family that I saw a face, it was just my brother that ridiculed me. My father definitely would have checked for an actual human because of one of the first comments he made was about a family that recently had a coin collection stolen from their house across the street. The event itself was easy to shrug off, because I could have chalked it up to a lot of other possibilities. It wasn't until 5 years later that it became freaky. The look on the wife's face before she told us about the dog was very telling, like something they decided to never put much thought into. Now my story adds depth to their experience, and theirs to mine. This did not make me a believer in the paranormal. I told the story as a collection of details, not a confirmation of ghosts. But what it did do was never make me a non-believer. That face, it was expressionless, dimly lit, through a door smaller than a 2x4, with a knob that had to be turned in order to open it. I wish I still had the VHS. This was from over 25 years ago now, and I moved a lot after high school, and the tape sadly never made it through all those moves. I slept at my grandparents' house pretty frequently growing up, and I hated it. I remember there were animal skins on the wall of my grandparents' house that they used for decoration. I guess it was a thing. And these little people, looking back, I think I would classify them as fairy-like, and would zoom from the skin with my covers and laugh and jump all the time. They would play around on my covers and then sort of hang off the skin when they jumped back off it, scaling their little terrain. Even as a kid, I would frequently check that my skin during the day didn't have any bumps or anomalies that would lead me to believe I saw something moving on it, when I didn't. And of course, there was nothing. Now I chalk it up to a high imagination period. But one thing that I do not regard as my imagination was when I went to stay at my grandparents' house, when I was somewhere between 11 and 13. I stayed in this same room. The skin had been tossed or moved at this point, and I went to lay down in bed one night. I'm a very light sleeper, and my grandpa always watched TV downstairs for most of the night, while my grandma would come up and sleep around 10 p.m, and their room was down the hall and to the right of mine. As I lay down at around 9 p.m. or 11, I kept hearing footsteps on my ceiling. The footsteps had a rhythm to them, and you could hear the weight of each step, and they would walk perpendicularly across the room above my bed, left to right, and sometimes walk back right to left the way they came. Or sometimes the footsteps would reset on the left side and walk across again. Initially I thought, oh, they have a pull-down attic, but there isn't any room for walking, and my grandparents wouldn't be up there. Perhaps a squirrel? I double-checked my hypothesis and went to check on my grandparents. My grandpa was watching TV with grandma. Weird. The pull-down attic was also above the stairs and sealed shut. So I go back to lay down, and the walking continues for 20 minutes, and grandma comes up and walks to bed. Finally, I get up and tell grandma about the strange noise, and ask for a fan to drown out the noise. I set the fan up, lay down, and try and get some rest. Oh boy, the footsteps intensify now, and the pacing seems to pick up over the fan. On one particular pass, the footsteps stopped midway on the ceiling directly above my bed, and plain as day, something with a deep voice whispers into my left ear. So you know I'm here. I don't think I could get out of bed so quick, and I slept in my sister's room on the floor after that. When I was 15 years old, my great-uncle passed away due to a sudden heart attack. Me and my father had to clean out his house since no one else in the family wanted to. My great-uncle was very much loved by all of us, and was really one of the nicest and most loving out of all of us. My father was just as broken up about losing him as everyone else, but the job had to be done. So we got there early in the morning to get it done. His house was very neat and well organized, so we would be done in a day or two tops. I remember as a kid we would always play over at his house when my dad had to work, and he would let us play anywhere in the house but the attic. He made it very clear to us that going up and down the ladder to the attic was dangerous. Therefore, we never went up there and never thought anything of it. Even though he would go up there sometimes for about 30 minutes and then come back down, never actually bringing anything down with him or taking anything up there. Well, anyway, while we were cleaning, I decided to finally go up to the attic to see if there was anything up there. It was completely empty besides 2 boxes that were tucked away in a corner. Thinking nothing of it, I picked them up and took them downstairs. Once I got to the living room, I opened them, expecting to see papers because the boxes were so light. Instead, I found all these pictures. I'm talking hundreds of pictures of what I could tell were pictures of 3 different women. all from angles where you could clearly tell they didn't know they were being photographed. He had pictures from daytime to nighttime, multiple locations. Some were undressed, in others they were just doing everyday things like cleaning or cooking. With every picture I looked through, my heart started to beat faster and faster. I realized one of the women was his wife, who had passed several years earlier. I looked on the back of the pictures and they were named. I didn't want to freak my family out without knowing exactly what I was looking at, so out of curiosity I googled the other two names and found one of the ladies on Facebook. So I know this is messed up to say, but I was glad to see that she was alive and okay. Once finding out that I showed the pictures to my dad, he was as shocked as I was. So he took the boxes, and I've never seen them again. We've never spoken of it. Still, every once in a while I find myself wondering why he had those pictures, and if he took them himself, or had someone else take them. I loved my great uncle very much, and I couldn't imagine him being anything less than a stand-up guy. I don't know what to think. I know this may not really be scary, but it certainly freaked me and my father out pretty bad. When I was around 8 years old, we moved into a new house. It wasn't old, but it wasn't a fairly new build either, perhaps made in around the 60s. Everyone got their own room, and this was the first time I had my own. I thought I was a big shot. A little background. I'd like to call myself somewhat of a sensitive ever since I was a child. I could sense something or someone around me, especially when no one else could. Fast forward to when I was around 9, it was the first year we were in the house, and I could feel the presence of something in there, but never really thought anything of it, considering it wasn't too negative. There were 3 rooms that I didn't really like being in because the energy felt somewhat dark. The basement, the bathroom, and the attic. I didn't mind being in the basement when I had friends over, but when I was alone, I couldn't be in there for more than 5 minutes without getting the feel that I was being watched. In the bathroom was a cabinet that was very deep. You could literally fit 2 grown men in there, and I never understood why it was so large. But it didn't feel right, and I would often feel drawn to just look inside and stare for a few minutes, and I would get a very uneasy feeling. The attic, on the other hand, was a different story. I never opened it. I kept the door shut at all times. Something was up there, and it did not want company. One night I was laying in bed. It was around 2:45 a.m. when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I assumed it was just one of my brothers coming home from a night out with friends. My bedroom door was open, so I looked to see if anyone was walking around. I stared for what seemed like 10 minutes and no one went by. I got scared, so I decided to wait it out. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I thought I could see a human-like shape in the corner of my bedroom. I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, so I tried to turn over and go to sleep. But I felt like I was being watched. Now, in a 9-year-old's mind, it's the boogeyman. So I quickly hopped out of bed and tried to run into my mum's room. Her room was only 2 doors down from mine, and in order to walk out of my room, you had to pass a wall that was somewhat slanted. In order to do this, you had to walk sideways. As I did this, I felt 2 hands press down on my shoulders, and I froze in fear. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream. I was a prisoner in my own body. Then all of a sudden, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. In my ear, clear as day, I heard heavy breathing. It didn't sound human. My eyes widened. Then I felt the pressure lift off me. I could move again. And I ran so fast down the small hallway into my mother's bed. That whole night I kept hearing someone walk back and forth in the hallway, but I refused to look through the doorway. When I tell you that I didn't sleep that night, I mean I didn't sleep that week. The next morning I walked into the hallway and just so happened to look up. The door to the attic was open, and I asked my mum why she was up in the attic, and she said that no one was there, and there was no reason it should have been open. My stomach felt like it was in my throat. I knew that whatever was in the attic was in my bedroom the night before just watching me, and I'm thankful I got out of bed when I did, because if I didn't, I don't want to think what would have happened. I'm 22 now. I can still remember that night as if it were yesterday, and I still can't sleep with the lights off. So to whoever you are that grabbed my shoulder, let's never ever meet again. Growing up, there was an extra room upstairs in our house that we used as an office. It had a closet with one of those tiny attic access doors on the side. We'd sometimes all be downstairs watching TV, and we'd hear a creaking sound moving towards that room. The room was next to mine, and sometimes I'd find the closet door open with the light on, and the little door to the attic cracked open. There was a spot on the wall that our declawed cat would always attack. There was missing paint from the cat attack. All of that was creepy, but the night the dog, who never came upstairs without my dad, started barking in the hallway by my room towards the office was the worst. She barked and growled for a bit. Then she started backing off into my room, while looking up, as if she was staring at the face of a person approaching her. She backed into my room and then squealed like she'd been stepped on, and ran into the far corner of my door and put her nose and eyes into the corner and whimpered. I picked her up and went downstairs to sleep on the couch. This was 14 years ago, and I'm still freaked out by it. My husband was working in a town called Moose Jaw in Saskatchewan. We usually just rent a short-term room or house where he's working since he moves around a lot. This time he was renting the attic of an old house on a main street. It was a large old home with multiple levels. Each level was being rented out as the owner renovated the home. I'm the type of person who loves staying in older houses. I especially was excited to stay in this house because of the strange architecture. You had to take a steep staircase on the side of the house up multiple floors to get to our suite. Once inside, you walked right into the bedroom with the kitchen and bathroom along the back wall. As soon as I got into the house, I had a strange feeling, like chills down my spine. I told my husband and we chalked it up to moving jitters. Things got strange from here. The bathroom and kitchen were both tucked into small cutouts in the house. The roofs were short, and I could barely stand straight at 5'2". In the bathroom there was a little door, a wall hidden behind the old clawfoot tub. Every time I would go to the washroom or take a bath, it sounded like someone was lightly tapping on the door. A few nights I started to have really bad nightmares, ones where my husband would have to wake me up because I was screaming so loud. I felt like I was pinned to the bed and wasn't able to escape. I had never felt anything like that before. I can't explain it, but it felt like I wasn't wanted, like something was wanting me to get out or else. I stopped sleeping during the night because I was so scared of having nightmares. I would sit in bed and look out the window just hoping for daytime again so that I could leave the house. I must have drifted off to sleep at some point because the next thing I knew I was being dragged off my bed by my feet. My husband was sleeping next to me, and I remember grabbing onto him as though my life depended on it. He freaked out and jumped out of bed. Whatever was pulling me stopped right in front of the steep stairs. We did not stay there another night. I still sometimes doubt that it even happened, but thankfully my husband witnessed it and can reassure me I'm not crazy. Whatever was there in the house was not friendly and did not want me there. I will never return. My grandparents would hear things in the attic, like conversations, music boxes that would play. Most notably, they would hear a baby crying. My grandmother sewed things for everyone in the family in the attic. She worked in a sewing factory. If you ripped your jeans, the attic is where you got them fixed. My grandmother would go up there often, and there would be boxes in the middle of the floor opened, absolutely not how she left them. The sewing machine faced a window. On the windowsill were a bunch of small Mother Mary figurines. They got the house blessed regularly by a priest, and every time he came he left a Mother Mary figure. To my knowledge, there was never anything sinister that happened, but I'm not sure I was shared everything by them. Why else would a priest come so often? I can at least say that I myself have never experienced anything in the attic or the house and never felt anything sinister there. I think the priest stopped coming before I was born. I also remember the story of my cousin who had a mattress. She thought it was haunted. She said she would feel like she was awake all night trying to get out of bed but couldn't. That happened every time she slept in it. She'd then wake up exhausted. After complaining enough, her dad thought she was nuts, so took a turn sleeping in her bed. He felt the same thing, and the mattress was thrown out. While I was clarifying with my cousin about her experiences with the mattress, I learned that the mattress itself came from my grandmother's attic. I need to give you a bit of backstory before I tell the story. I was raised an only child, and my parents were both extremely busy with their careers. One of the ways that we got to have fun together during the summer holidays was hiding things. Now, this isn't your conventional hiding stuff kind of game. Imagine National Treasure and the Da Vinci Code mixed in. We'd create little games, puzzles, clues, most of the time while I was asleep. My mum and dad would write these clues, leave keys to boxes and stuff behind the house so that when I'd get up fairly late and my parents would be at work, I'd have something to do other than watch TV. Sometimes they'd take the TV remote or the Nintendo Wii controllers, sometimes even the internet cables, just to spice things up a bit. So if I wanted to do something, I had to play the game. For most people, this might sound like an inconvenience or an annoyance, but to me it was actually quite fun and got me into puzzles and stuff. But now that I've explained the backstory, you'll understand why I was doing this in the first place. It was a generic day in summer, a summer that seemed to drag. I lived in the countryside, very isolated, in a house with no neighbors for a very good distance, although I don't know specifically how far. I'm going to say at least a mile. I really wanted to hang out with my friends, but needed to wait until my parents got home so that they could take me, as the bus was a little bit too far to walk and I really didn't want to do the walk. Anyway, I'm just at home watching TV, when I suddenly want to make a sandwich. And as I make my way to the kitchen, I realize that all the knives are gone. This is really annoying. I was feeling lazy and telling myself I could just use the long part of a spoon, but decide that perhaps I should find the game in case I need a knife later on. I pull out the drawer further, pull up the cutlery holder, and find a small piece of paper, where it gives an anagram to where I should look next. I go and take the paper over to the kitchen table, grab a pen, and start trying to figuring out the letter combination that will tell me where I can find the knife. Usually in the house, we leave about 3 or 4 clues before we find the treasure. So as I was trying to solve this anagram, I hear something above my head. I look up. There's a definite creaking coming from upstairs, but it sounds muffled, almost like it's further up. I stab a guess. Could it be the attic? Why is the attic creaking? Although we live in the countryside, we've rarely heard any strange noises coming from up there, and this was definitely a first for me. A chill of fright wrung across my back, and I stared up for a few minutes, wondering what to do. After a little while, I decided it must have been my imagination, and there's no way there is anything up in the attic. Like I said, middle of nowhere, countryside. So what could possibly be up there, other than perhaps a wild animal that let itself in? Although I don't know how it would have done that. Regardless, I carry on with my quest. The anagram tells me that it's hidden in a clock, not any clock, a grandfather clock. And when I get there and have a little look around, I find the next piece of paper precariously hidden behind the metronome. I pull it out and look again. This next clue is hatch. It had a little egg on it, and I knew it was referring to the hatch to the attic. This is where the creep factor got me. Had my parents hidden themselves in the attic or something? Things were starting to get a bit weird. I glanced up at the clock. It was only 10:15. Is it feasible that they waited for me to get up, hid in the attic, and were going to surprise me with something? Maybe. I was starting to grow more and more convinced of this notion, so I giddily made my way upstairs, pulled down the string, and was expecting to get a piece of paper or something, but there was nothing. So, I pulled down the ladder, pulled on the light switch, and started taking steps up to the attic. When I got to about the 5th step, I had to turn on the main light switch to illuminate the rest of the attic. I was so excited. I honestly believed I was going to get some sort of surprise for my parents, but as the light came on, there was nothing. There was only one obstacle. Our water heater was up here, so they could have easily hidden behind it, but I was sure with the light turning on they would have made a noise. I slowly and purposefully make creaking noises as I approach the corner that's hidden. And just as I peek my head around the boiler, do I not see my parents, but some disheveled-looking human in what appears to be foul-smelling clothes, old and dank. I think what impressed me the most was the hair. It had become so dirty that it just stuck together. It was honestly disgusting. I had no idea how he even got up there, and for a split second, I didn't know what to do. I was like a deer in headlights. It only took a second to realize what situation I was in, and the fact that he turned his head and opened his eye and stared at me. I almost fell through the attic in horror and quickly scrambled down the stairs, turned the light off, and shut the door in record speed. The piece of paper flitted down to the landing just as I closed the hatch. I didn't even bother picking it up. I ran straight to my bedroom, got my mobile phone, and dialed my parents. My mum said she'd be there within an hour, but to call my dad as he worked nearby. I called my dad, and within 15 minutes he was here, and we were waiting for police. By the time they arrived, they came upstairs, and I refused to open the hatch but told them where he was. It took them no longer than about a minute to handcuff and bring down a really dirty-looking man. He didn't say why he was up there. He didn't say anything at all. Once he left, my dad told me to go downstairs to calm down and to get myself a drink or something while he spoke to the police, just as my mother arrived, so I began filling her in. When my dad came back down with the police officer, they were carrying a small backpack. I assumed it was the homeless man's stuff. Later that evening, my dad filled my mum and I in on what exactly was in the backpack. There was a knife, a rope, duct tape, children's dolls, and a few other questionable things I'd rather not mention. I have no idea what this sicko was planning to do, but the police say that perhaps he knew that I was home alone, and he'd been following my family's movements. He'd taken an opportune moment and then snuck in. Who knows what he wanted to do, or how he got those things. All that I know is that he'll be behind bars for a very long time. I still don't know his name. I refused to hear it. My father once asked if I wanted to know, but I said no. It brings chills, knowing that playing my silly game almost brought me so close to perhaps death. But what surprises me the most was how he didn't react when I saw him. He just looked at me. Was he really going to use that stuff on me? I have so many questions and so few answers. I really wish there were more to this. As you can imagine, the game my parents played hiding stuff ended after this. Hey guys, it's Mort here. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories, if of course you did. Or you can let me know that down below. It's always very much appreciated. The attic's always been a very spooky place for me. Never one I really went to, but mostly because it was where we stored all our stuff. You know, loads of stuff you don't use. So there was never really much reason to go there. There's not even an attic in this house anyway. I would like to extend a huge thank you to my members and patrons whose names are on screen. You guys really are amazing. Thank you so much. Truly. Oh, let's see any updates. Baby can be born any day now, so, you know, if I vanish for a day or two, that could be why. Although I am trying to work and get a bit more advanced, but it is harder than you might imagine. So yes, that's just, you know, little updates for you guys. Can't think of anything else really. Sorry, it's been a pretty chill week, I suppose, just prepping for baby. There's not much to say other than that. But I'll hopefully see you Wednesday. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.